Microphone check. There it is. There's my voice. How are y'all feeling? Oh, okay. Okay. Could you feel a little bit better? Okay. Hopefully the show will make you feel a little bit better. Can we just get like a round of applause? Doesn't it feel like a show? Doesn't it feel like a show now? My name is Brandon Wintz. I am one of the kind of events coordinator, MC individuals here at Massy Arts. For how many of you is it your first occasion to be at Massy Arts Society? Look at all of you. First timers, wonderful. I should say, welcome, welcome. Massy Arts Society is an indigenous-led space. As such, you know, I kind of view Massy Arts Society as a iteration, or like, but one of many iterations of decolonial practice. And I'll say more about that as we get to the land acknowledgement. But yeah, here's an introduction from BC Book Prizes. But before I get to that, I should do the good thing of thanking our sponsors, which thankfully today are numerous. So let's thank the government of Canada. It's always awkward for me to be like, Indigenous owned and led space, and then thank you, government. But also, thank you to the province of BC for funding this event, and thank you also to the BCAC, I think, oh, and BC Creative. Wow, yeah, we got them all in there. We got them all in there today. And so, in terms of introduction, I'll just say that on behalf of the book prizes, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples and the many other indigenous communities who have spent centuries stewarding these lands that we now call British Columbia and Yukon. As we celebrate the power of stories to transform, to teach, and inspire, we encourage you to take time to listen and learn from the stories and the histories of the places you call home. And so, to that, I would just add that I think part of the job of a space like Massy Arts Society is to invite stories that have some hand in interrupting the colonial story that is this country, that is this province. And so I hope we can, listen and learn and commune in that spirit. In the spirit of communing, unfortunately, there are other tenants in the building who are quite loud today. It's okay, it's okay. Without further ado then, I will introduce our authors and also say that finally I got the square reader to work, which is to say all these books, all the readings that you're going to hear, all the books are for sale today. Our first author, Tsering Yangzom Lama, holds a BA in Creative Writing and International Relations from the University of British Columbia and an MFA from Columbia University. Born and raised in Nepal, Tsering has lived in Toronto, New York City, and Vancouver, where she now resides. We Measure Earth with Our Bodies is her first novel, and it's a finalist for the 2023 S.O. Wilson Fiction Prize and the Jim Diva Prize for Writing That Provokes. Join me in welcoming
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Brandon, and to everybody at Massy Arts Center for having us here. It's my first time, but I'm just delighted to be here and to see so many people here. It's really lovely too. And congratulations to my fellow nominees, whom I've met already. So it's really nice to see you again. So I'm just going to read from page 7 from my novel. So this is basically Ama. So this character named Hamo is describing the invasion of her village and her country. And her mother, who she calls Ama, is a village oracle, which is a really ancient practice in Tibet. So her mother has just been initiated as an oracle. She's been resisting that. She's been resisting the gods for a while, but because of the invasion, she decides to listen to them and to speak on their behalf. It wasn't long after Amma's initiation that the snake entered our village. a row of dark trucks, rattling the earth and sending up clouds of dust. Still, the foreigners didn't seem so frightening as I'd imagined. I had almost expected to see horns sticking out of their heads, but they were just young men and women who insisted that they had not come to hunt us or hurt us. All they wanted was to gather everyone and to have a conversation. We were required to do as they said, so Tenki and I walked to the village square as Dixon followed closely along. That's the dog. The crowd was thick, but we slipped through to the first row. "We have heard about the oracles in your region," said the head soldier, his country's words translated by a former salt merchant who was now working for the invaders. "It's time to get to the bottom of these rumors," the merchant translated through his Plaza dialect, which was hard for us to understand. As the head soldier gave his orders, I noticed how handsome he was, though he moved his head in a jerking manner. He couldn't have been more than 25 years old. 2 soldiers led 3 women into the circle. Amma was in the group. Right away, I pulled Tenki close so she wouldn't cry out. We watched as the women headed to the center of the square and were instructed to stand in line. Amma kept her gaze toward the hills, while the other women looked into the crowd as though silently requesting help. People murmured and shifted in agitation. Even Dixon began to growl beneath his shaggy bangs, so I nudged him twice with my leg to quiet him. "If the powers of these so-called oracles are indeed real," the merchant said, "if these superstitions have any basis, these women will surely pass a simple test." A soldier carried a large bowl of water into the middle of the crowd. He walked around the circle, showing the contents of the bowl. Inside, there were several small stones within the water. All but one of the stones were ordinary. That one stone was a bright red coral. "Red as the star on my hat," the soldier said, pointing at his head with a smile. A few people smiled and laughed nervously in response. The soldier went to the first woman in line and tied a blindfold around her eyes. I told myself there was nothing to fear. This test was not unlike the ones Amma faced during her initiation. She would surely find the coral among the pebbles. But just as the soldiers covered Amma's eyes, Bala walked over, picked up Tenki in his arms, and took me by the hand. "Don't make any noise," he said. We slipped away quietly, helped by a few people who covered us. Back home, Bala ushered us through the door, though he remained outside. Even as he tried to sound steady, his voice was tense, as though trying to swallow flies caught in his throat. "Mama, take your sister to bed," he managed to say before heading back on the road toward the village square. Once we could no longer hear his footsteps, I led my sister to our bed, pulled the blankets over our heads, and began to tell stories about the mischievous hero, Agudomba, until Tenki fell asleep. Late that evening, the yak bells announced my parents' return. Peering into their room, I watched with secret relief as Amma put away her regalia and instruments in a wooden trunk. In the days that followed, I learned what had happened from pieces of conversation. All 3 women had failed the test, and they were now forbidden from practicing divinations or healing again. For several weeks, the house was quiet, and no one came with requests. But slowly, people in our village began to knock at our doors at night, followed by visitors from farther away. It seemed everyone agreed that the Gemi test was rigged. "These soldiers have been doing tests across the entire region," they said. "I heard the devils failed every medium they encountered. We've had oracles in this region for 800 years, from time immemorial, even before the Buddha's teachings came to this land. Nothing and no one can stop our God speaking to us." But I was finished with the divinations. I had seen my father's face as he led us away from the village square. I had imagined my mother's severed hands falling on our roof. Whenever a ritual took place in the middle of the night, I left the house with Dixon, and we wandered by moonlight into the hills. Even in daylight, I stayed away from our house, choosing to watch the soldiers in their peculiar labors instead. One afternoon, I heard some thumping above my head. I went onto the roof and saw soldiers attaching boxes to the poles where we normally hung prayer flags. Our flags had been tossed aside, thrown in the corner of the roof, even though they were lined with sacred texts that should never touch the ground. I quickly gathered the soiled prayer flags so that we could dispose of them properly in a fire ceremony. One of the soldiers came near me and knelt down. He looked young, perhaps just a few years older than me. I pointed up and asked what the boxes were for. He replied in a tongue that was sharp and nasal, which I didn't understand. When I didn't understand, he tried again, cupping his hands around his mouth this time and moving his lips as if he were shouting. I shook my head and laughed. At this, the soldier recoiled in disgust before standing up and walking away. I will never forget his face. A near-perfect square, his hair fell in soft wisps down his eyebrows, the sides cut close to a scalp, his appearance meticulously controlled. It must have been the next morning when a strange, high-pitched music blared from those boxes, hour after hour, broken only by long speeches. Amma paced in the kitchen, pressing her ears closed, and Dixon wouldn't stop barking. Eventually, Tenki and I led him to the animal stable so he could hide his furry black head in the hay. Sitting there with our hands resting on Dixon's trampling back, I thought about the day Amma was tested by the soldiers. I wondered if she had seen us in the crowd, if she knew how frightened we had been. Did she look to the hills that day because that is where the gods reside, or because she couldn't face us? Soon it was too dangerous to continue the divinations, even in secret. The soldiers were becoming brash. They called themselves our leaders and enlisted one male child from every family to become a soldier or laborer for the army. Our way of life, they said, was nothing but savage. One night, a voice from the noisy boxes on our rooftops ordered everyone to the monastery. When we arrived before the prayer halls, the monks were already standing outside in a line. There were even some nuns who must have been brought down from the convent in the hills. Before them, there was a box of iron tools, sickles, and hammers. Stop there.
Our next reader this evening is Harrison Mooney. Harrison Mooney is a writer and journalist born to a West African immigrant mother who was adopted as an infant by a white family and raised in the Bible Belt, British Columbia. He has worked for the Vancouver Sun for nearly a decade as a reporter, an editor, and a columnist. His writing has also appeared in the National Post, The Guardian, Yahoo, and McLelland. Harrison Mooney lives in East Vancouver with his family. Invisible Boy is a finalist for the 2023 Hubert Evans Nonfiction Prize and Jim Diva Prize for Writing That Provokes. Welcome to the stage.
Hello. Hi. I'm Harrison Mooney. I'm going to offer the disclaimer that I'm just feeling very raw today. So I don't think I've ever cried reading my own book, and I really hope I don't today, but I might. I turned 38 in 3 days, and I knew when I wrote this book that there was a pretty good chance that it would be the functional end of my relationship with my adoptive family. But the reality of that has still hit really hard. So even when we were kind of estranged, my adoptive mom would still call me at Christmas and on my birthday. But Christmas came and went this year with no phone call, and I know that there won't be a phone call later this week, and it's got me upset. So I'm just gonna limber up. Here we go. All right. I'm reading from the opening. This is chapter 1, Circus, or The Boy Who Wore a Very Loud Hat. I don't know where I came from, but I remember craving something sweet. So I stopped at the coffee shop on my way home. I must have been about 16. I drove down in my black Toyota Echo, but I left there feeling 8 or 9 years old. I was standing in line for a donut, or 6 donut holes in a box, when an elderly white woman turned around, saw me behind her, and shouted out, "Little black waif." She said each word sharply, with beats in between, loud enough for everyone to notice. The room fell so silent I heard my tinnitus, the ringing that starts when the world goes away. One moment, I stood in a long line of people. The next, I was locked in a liminal space with a stranger whose hatred immobilized me. It felt like the power went out in the building, but I couldn't breathe, just as I couldn't see, and I found myself wondering, how do I move? So I knew that the power had only gone out from my body. And then it was over. The elderly white woman's partner laid hands on her, lovingly, graciously, leading her back to the counter to order a duchy, a cruller, and 2 double-doubles. I looked around at the tables, hoping that the woman was shouting at somebody else, and I saw that it couldn't be anyone else, and the rest of the coffee shop's customers already knew that. I felt every pair of eyes identify me, the weight of the white gaze descending, impressing upon me, imagining who might this little black waif be, and where did he come from, and what did he do to provoke this poor woman? But interest in me faded quickly, and suddenly I disappeared, as though nothing had happened to anyone. No one saw anything. The power of their denial teleported me outside. 1 minute I was there, and then I wasn't. I was simply whisked away, as if by magic. When I got home without any donuts, my white family wouldn't believe me. I must have misheard or done something wrong, they insisted, and 5 sets of cynical eyes took me back to the scene of the crime. Let's go through it again. My mother, who micromanaged all that I imagined, suggested that somehow I'd shown disrespect. It felt like she wanted to blame me. I wanted to help her. But nothing I could think of would explain the old lady's explosion. I didn't jump the queue. I didn't fail to hold the door. The woman was in front of me. I didn't stand too close. I didn't dance or curse. I didn't try to snatch her purse. She was probably demon-possessed, said my mother, who saw the devil everywhere. But even this failed to account for the outburst. What was it about me that so offended her evil spirit, and why would it suddenly erupt right there in the coffee shop, and why, if my mother's suspicions were true, would the Lord leave me so unprotected? What was I wearing, I wonder now? I don't recall. I've lost sight of myself over time. My day-to-day style that particular summer was Hawaiian print, mostly, so maybe the loudness offended the woman, but it could have been Sunday, and then I'd be dressed up for church. Who could be bothered by church clothes? A demon-possessed sort of person, perhaps. Maybe my mother was right, and the incident wasn't about race at all. I was adopted. I began in Vancouver, British Columbia, the westernmost province of Canada, cut from my birth mother's womb in July 1985. She was 15 or 16 years old, in foster care then, just a wayward black youth who engaged in premarital sex with the star of her high school soccer team. He was a white kid. His family was German. Keeping this biracial baby was out of the question, but so was abortion. The families were Christian. Surrender was all but imposed on the mother. She had little say in the matter. She took me to term, and they took me away, born to no one, a ward of the Salvation Army's Grace Hospital. 11 days later, the paperwork cleared. A wealthy white couple arrived to collect me. They didn't take me far. The city of Abbotsford is an hour's drive east into the Fraser Valley, named for the river that emerges there from the canyons at sea level. The fertile region is rich with raspberries and religion, and is derisively nicknamed the Bible Belt of British Columbia on account of its many churches. In Abbotsford, the largest Fraser Valley community, there are nearly 100 congregations, one for every 1,000 residents, and the nickname is a point of pride. If this is the Bible Belt, pastors would say, then Abbotsford must be the buckle. The mostly white suburb, which borders on Washington State, is also the site of the only recorded lynching in Canadian history. The 14-year-old victim, a Stolo boy named Louis Sam, was hung from a tree by a mob of Americans dressed as his people 101 years before my arrival, and just down the road from my house, by the mini golf course. But I didn't know that then. Abbotsford's history never came up. We were starting from scratch. I was raised in a vacuum, brought up between bed sheets, educated at home from grade 4 to grade 12 through a Christian curriculum published in Florida. Some children thrive on independent study. For me, a black adoptee cut off from my community and trapped in an all-white cocoon, it meant finding my way with no context for my situation, no sense of shared struggle or circumstance, and no contact with those who could help me to see what I needed to see to make sense of the world. In a roundabout way, my white family created me. For all creation stories begin with a separation. They gave me a new name. They gave me a language that limited how I envisioned myself. They told me that I was delivered, not into the arms of a woman who loved me, but out of the darkness. My creation was sinful. Two sinners had sinned. That's how I was made. That's what I was. And sin makes God sick to his stomach. He can't even look at it. But somehow, he saw me, they said, and he gave me to them. I believed them, and so I was saved. I became born again. Thereafter, I came to imagine my blackness as proof of my brush with the fires of hell. What a relief to escape with the skin of my teeth.
This evening's final reader is Cecily Nicholson. Cecily Nicholson is the author of 4 books and a past recipient of the Dorothy Livesay Poetry Prize and the Governor General's Literary Award for Poetry. She is an assistant professor in poetry at the School of Creative Writing at UBC. Cecily is the inaugural honoree of the Phyllis Webb Memorial Reading Award from the Poetry in Canada Society and will be the wow, I can't read right now. The bio is just so dense, my mouth is tripping. And will be the 2024-25 Holloway Lecturer in Poetry and Poetics at the University of UC Berkeley. Please join me in welcoming Cecily Nicholson.
Check. How do we sound there at the back? Who's this fellow? It looks official. First of all, my thanks to Massy Books, Brandon. Thank you for folks translating. Thank you for coming. And it's my honor to read in this company. I really, congratulations on your obviously incredibly important books. We're switching the gears to poetry. So here we go. Objectively, apparently, poetry. We'll see. So this is from my work called Harrowings. It's for my brother Daniel B., playing live at the Stampede, and love to Carolyn G., wherever you are. Places my hand on the relief cast of Carver's The Cast is Cool. Hand vibrates to feel the whole surface at once, memory and indent, sense of prints, extent, charge, tips through index and middle metacarpals. It was the passing shadow of a bird, at rest, my hand settling on Hathaway's sculpture. Well, that music isn't quiet, is it? You know what it reminds me? Once I launched a book and it was Game 7 of the Canucks final in the room behind us. That was worse. So, associatory simple elements, the store of atmosphere, pounds of water brought as properties to situate within genealogy, giving backs to land and intellectual and art history, idle moments put to gathering, to care, to share food, to not solely succumb to logics of land, crop, harvest, as required by institutions of slavery and capital. The country wears a rich and luxuriant aspect. In 1854, Frederick Douglass set out from Rochester, New York, to attend a gathering to mark the 20-year anniversary of the West India Emancipation, the 1st of August celebration at Dawn Settlement for fugitive slaves. He traveled most of the 300-mile journey by rail, except for 16 miles between Chatham and the settlement referred to by wagon. Douglas journeyed through the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Mississauga, the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, and Miami nations to reach the so-called historic county of Kent. About that 1854 journey, Douglas remarks, in regard to the place itself, it is one of the most beautiful and desirable locations or localities for agriculture, commerce, and education, which we know of in Canada West. I reflect further on fugitivity at that time and upon life in the near aftermath of slavery as the Dominion of Canada formed. The language and logics of farm stem from structures of settler colonialism, even if they embody emancipatory practices, and this makes for complicated dreams. sufficiently free from the fatigue of this journey, rounding a corner to the song of the lark, the light so familiar I had to sit. For many voices, starts, a moth, a lit, a rhetorical Du Bois. Faltering inches of progress, the dawning, as the sundial says to the soil, your auntie up the road just now recalls. The light in here. I should stay in this greenhouse all the time. The light is the third lake you had to run early morning, save quartering all afternoon or risk a catch of storm. This year I will remember and make a habit of watering the lettuce and Detroit special beets that run the balcony. A magnificent row witnessed and admired on a hotbed as sprouts. It's that kind of light in here. From here to you. From here to you. Rock piles. How my brother and I, the youngest, imagine stories in and of the dirt as it descends. Which bones and artifacts will become present? The butterfly stone fossils become possessions. Which culture were we supposed to make fun of ourselves? The dirty fingers, brown and browner, overturn new rocks in the rock pile, freer from restraint, the mindset of diggers on our commons. Hunting in rock piles, the light stretched longer, enough to catch, to risk our feet catching crags of dark matter. We formed adjacent rock beds made out of rocks, and we set ourselves in to watch the sundown over and over the same fields. The sky cast bushed shadows an acre off relief in a thin band of horizon. Stars rose brightly and never set. Circling the best days, a glow filled our hearts as if our homeland, hometown. Well, and finally, after winter nights, paved roads whitened completely as flakes piled up past cladding through the ditches. The snow fence bending one ruddy weak slat after another against the draft, whose very purpose seemed to penetrate. The fences figure again and again. For now, iron rods and constant burrows of rust chronicling weather. Winter such as this pushed deeper into spring, flattening buds and their longing bursts of fragrance. A relief, the time between bird calls lessening. Relief when finally the smell of mud struck consciousness, like lilacs, only sweeter. As the heat of the sun registered warmth on skin, trickles of water coursed the driveway, rutting a lower ditch as the water table began to rise. Well, it is barely spring. Winter lingered this year. We need to dig a new well. Knowing enough of septic tanks and cisterns, something of metal alloys comprising pipes and the insulation prayer that keeps things from bursting on the coldest snow belt nights, many were awake, but for different reasons. Hearing the creaks, know enough to be wary, early lessons in infrastructure. I absolved myself of worry in this future as a renter in a cloud, tethered to networks and systems, city miles up from rain barrels and arable. To plan a well could use a diviner in advance. There was something to do, somewhere to start, when the pond did not indicate potable. Found the soil, sprouts, rocks, and thugs, and was out of the way, so that happened to be where the diviner encouraged a backhoe to dig. And there, every foot deeper, cost money. Adults went to work, children went to school, a whole day returns to no new source. Pinched faces at the window murmur about what will happen should they have to stop. Maybe there's insufficient water on this property, and likely more debt. Somatically, my body remembers farm as a rurally entrenched kid, as I lived once cultivated and punctuated by the occasional bush and ditches that weren't much at all like these rolling hills, songed in mission bells, in reach of cemetery lawns, across the road away, that feel familiar now, field as playground, ward youth, intermittently involved in state care, that cared less, I care more, and for more, about and around me. La Paperson observes that we cannot reckon with how black people are often confronted by the impossibility of settlement because anti-blackness positions black people as out of place on land. Adrift, a current, the harrowing undulary, deft carves and smooth turns handle a moment or two of river. Where have I been a settler is where I am, restored, returning to efforts of cultivation. I think on Vicky Mochana's discussion of mutual aid and other reminders that these practices are not new, rather long-standing traditions instilled in community, black community and experience after carceral ended days, stitched together with song and sung drums reconstituted. I look up from that outside spot to sight the angles of eaves, troughs and drainage, pretending that it was my sandbox and my swing, my acidic cherry tree, the reddish-brown undertones closest to family I've never been able to outgrow in the belly. How much is easier to write now, my hands grasping at soil. Vegetable seeds, beet seeds, Detroit Supreme beet seeds, long time standard green with a maroon tinge, full shade, full sun, or partial shade.